Hello, everyone, again, and welcome to episode 18 of our podcast, The Bible Beyond the Basics. We welcome you once again. This is Bob, and I am Jason, and we are so thankful that you are joining us again today. We have a really interesting discussion today. To start out, Bob, I wanted to ask you a question. So, one of the things I've found in life is that children tend to be really truthful. More so than sometimes we want. And they can really, if they're talking to you, they can really get to you with some of the issues that you just don't like. Sometimes they'll make fun of you. If a group of them can get together, they can really get on a person. And so let's say you've got a group of middle schoolers who are harassing you. They're maybe calling you names. Maybe they're making fun of your mustache. How do you respond, Bob? What is the best way to respond in this situation?
Okay. Well, obviously I'm not their age because I got the mustache. Oh, well, it's obvious. If they're really obnoxious and pushy, I'll bring out some she-bears to kill them.
Yeah, clearly. If we're all trying to be biblical, the best response, if you were a godly person, is to call specifically she-bears onto them and just have them mauled.
That's right, yeah.
And this is precisely what happens in one of the particular passages we're looking at here in the Old Testament. This has always been, to me, one of the most fascinating passages that I've seen. Even as I was a child, I read this and I was just blown away. I just thought it was so incredibly humorous. For whatever reason, just because they're making fun of the prophet for being a quote-unquote bald head.
That's right.
And he just cannot contain himself to the point where the prophet of God, he can't be called a bald head, so he's going to call she-bears on a group of children. And this is just out there.
Oh, yeah. It's, well, and I have a question for you in a second here. But, boy, given all the violent and pushy and obnoxious people we come into daily, whether it's like Saturday when I had a guy who was way over the top as a coach against my team, and I kind of turned to my parents and said, that guy really needs some Xanax. Because he kind of missed the whole purpose of AYSO soccer.
Yeah, well, it's really important that these children soccer players are just vicious as possible.
10 and 11 year olds, and we're playing for the World Cup, of course.
Of course.
So all the, you get people in the cashier line, or when you're driving especially, and like Pennsylvanians don't know how to yield properly, but they think they realize that if I'm merging, you're supposed to yield, not me. Things like that. And wouldn't it be great if all our ugly thoughts about how to get even with pushy, obnoxious, violent people, and we could bring out she-bears and say, wouldn't that be great?
The interstate would just be covered in bear carcasses and destroyed vehicles. It'd just be mayhem.
I would love it. That's the inner side of us. So how would I respond? Well, if it were kids, it's going to be a little different because I'm a teacher and I love junior highs.
Sure.
Because quite frankly, all you have to do is say, to any junior high, say, is that a pimple on your nose?
Yeah.
Or, maybe masks are a good thing because you're not really that attractive. Anybody who wanted to devastate a junior high kid can do it.
Yeah, it's not too difficult.
It's not difficult because they're so sensitive and so vulnerable. That's why I love them so, and you want to encourage them. And so rather than scolding them I had a great soccer coach who said, I will never criticize a kid for making a mistake doing the right thing.
Yeah.
So you want to encourage, especially at the junior high level. That's why my daughter also is a junior high teacher, 7th grade teacher, because she loves that age group. Because They want to please, but they also want to begin to rebel and call you names. Now, bullies, and actually what I did when I was a kid before Mustache, I formed my own gang, and I was the captain, and we actually got the other gang trapped because we sent Mike Dupé into the jungle gym, and he climbed up and they all attacked him, and then he escaped.
Oh, jeez.
And then I circled them with my team, and we hit them with rocks.
That's quite the org. That kind of sounds like Saul.
Well, that's kind of why my colonel in high school wanted me to go to West Point.
There you go. My daughter is currently involved in the black market trading of fidget toys on the recess playground. So a little bit different, but still finding her own way to be rebellious.
Yeah, and playgrounds are the breeding grounds of adulthood.
Yeah, sure.
Teachers try to monitor, but boy, that's where you learn things. Anyhow, as a junior high, I would reply differently. As an adult, I go, okay, that's funny, and turn it into a joke. Yeah, I'm bald, well, or whatever, or I have a big mustache and they call me Walrus. But I get to eat food all week.
Yeah, sure.
Because it stays there. Anyhow, now my question to you is, okay, if you have been fascinated with this passage, and it's something that we really need to articulate, especially as we've been going through all these weird texts, and yes, in a few weeks we're going to get into the New Testament and turn the corner into some other things. But how do you, Jason, look at a text like this and what we call exegete it, interpret it, bring the message out of it? What are your steps?
Sure. And, Bob just asked me to prepare for this a couple minutes beforehand, so I'm trying to put it together in my mind. But, in exegesis is what they call it in seminary, and ek meaning out of, the Jesus part being knowledge. How do you take the knowledge out of the passage? As opposed to eisegesis, which means to put the knowledge in, put your own understanding on top of it. And I don't know if I'm more of an exegeter or an eisegeter, but I think for me, you have to start with some assumptions. First of all, you're assuming that the passage, that God has something to say to you in the passage, no matter what the passage is in Scripture. I've heard people say before that, I wouldn't preach on this passage or that passage. But I think every passage has something to say. And so I begin with that assumption. Okay. Even if it's not something I agree with initially and maybe I get turned around, or the ones that you might not agree with initially can be the ones that teach you the most. So I assume that the passage has something to say. I also assume that we have to understand the passage in a historical context. And so you have to read about the history and the culture and everything surrounding the passage. And having done this for a few years now, I have some understanding of what's happening in particular contexts, but more obscure passages, I'll have to do a little bit more research. And that's to allow the passage, you assume that the passage has something to say, and you want the passage to have its own voice. And maybe even you go in, you look at the Hebrew or the Greek, depending on what the passage is, and see, well, how are these words different? How is the language or the grammar different from the way that we would approach it in our society? So you get a base understanding of what's going on in the text, and then as you allow it to speak for yourself, as you do your best to hear what it's saying, then you can begin the process of interpreting, saying their society was like this, our society was like this. What is the message that still holds true, that is central to this? And I find over and over again in Scripture, I come back to passages from one time to another, and it'll still be speaking, and it's speaking in different ways. And so you come with the assumption that God is always speaking in this passage, no matter what our context might be. And I think in the Presbyterian circles, we give supremacy to the Word. We allow the Word to speak, and then we interpret that.
Right.
That's
No, that's a beautiful description. And people need to know when they read the Bible, that's also expected of them when they hear it. You know?
yeah.
And ways to do that is, as you said, with the language, the historical context. Sometimes it's putting yourself into the text. Mm-hmm. You know, as you asked, if I were being attacked by a bunch of obnoxious little junior highs, how do you respond?
Yeah, and I think part of it is you put yourself, after you have an understanding of what's going on, you can put yourself into the text, but you can't walk a mile in somebody else's shoes unless you have access to the shoes.
Yeah.
And so that's why you have to do the early research first. And then I think it's really appropriate to try and walk around in there and try and understand. But you have to have some sort of boundary or frame of reference to be able to do so.
Yeah, some church members would not be surprised to know that basically it takes a lot of dig work to get into a text. And as you say, I could do 3 years ago a certain text, but 3 years later it's going to have a new meaning because of the Holy Spirit. It's going to pop out. So the dig work actually, and for a basic Sunday message, takes about 20 hours to do the right homework.
It used to be back in the day, some professors will even say this, they say for every hour that you preach, you should do an hour of research.
Yeah.
And I can't say that I always follow that, but I think some of it you gain some of that knowledge as time goes on. But I was just talking to an older seasoned pastor recently who said that that's exactly what they do to this day.
And in my methodology, just to explain to the congregation that is listening, that's one of the reasons why I plan sermons well in advance, because now as a supply preacher, I just booked, for example, yesterday I was up at Lycoming preaching. We had a session meeting and they wanted me to come back in November. So this afternoon I'm going to look at the November text. So what I'm doing is sort of like a cup of coffee. I know the text and I've written it down on my little notepad and I'm brewing it.
And that's part of the process for me too. I will read the text initially, but then after I've read it, people ask me how much time I spend in sermon preparation, and I can never really give a great answer because my process is reading it, and then throughout the week, I'll just live my life, interact with people, watch what's happening in the world with the text kind of brewing in the back of my mind.
Exactly. Yeah.
And with you, it's even longer. You've got those texts that are sitting there and
well, actually, Steve,
months on end. Yeah.
Well, Steve Curitan, when he came here and filled in, he was surprised that actually I planned my sermons for a year.
Yeah.
Knowing the idea that I could detour, because once you have a roadmap, you can detour. But you're incubating, you're brewing, you're thinking, you're putting it in context. The other advantage I had was because it's not just going to be me. One of the things I developed for texts like this, which are going to be weird. Was the Bible study. So if this is the Sunday message, it was my Wednesday Bible study. And so I loved the comments that I got from the members of the congregation and their insights. And many a time I would quote them on Sunday morning. Because they were far more insightful than I was. So this is the engaging part. What questions come to your mind, and that to me was my exegesis, always beginning with the questions.
There's been certain things I've heard in Bible studies before that have just completely flipped a switch in my head, and I'm sure you have too, as you're saying right there.
Profoundly, and that's the joy, because. Quite frankly, I've always said the congregation is far more religious than I am. So they know that.
Sure.
Well, I'm not missing. I'm not sidestepping the she bears.
Sure.
And Elisha.
And why were they she bears as opposed to just? Was that taking it easier on them as opposed to having male bears, or were they angrier because of the cubs, or?
Well, I hate to say this, but she bears are far more deadly than male bears because she bears always group. The male bear is a lonely hunter and solitary and out there. The she bears tend to. There's a reason Charles Dickens had as his most evil person. What was her name? It'll come to me in a second. During the guillotine, she was knitting. Anyway, there's nothing more ruthless than a mommy that is angry and defending her cub.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess this really says that if you need something like Rogaine or such, it's biblical.
And we're part of a whole series here. By the way, it's hysterical because a little bit earlier, for example, we're dealing with annoying people and violence, and one of my favorite stories is Barak and Deborah. Basically, the Sisera is the king, Barak is the general, Deborah is in charge. By the way, it's one of those Old Testament passages in Judges, and basically they win the victory over the Canaanite king. Sisera escapes, and he seeks asylum, and he goes into the house of Sisera. Or Jael, excuse me. Sisera goes into the house of Jael, and the men are delayed in protecting the women because the men are dividing the spoils and figuring out the captive women, which captive woman goes to which man of Israel.
Yeah, sure.
Which has got to make a big impression on the women back home. Okay, like Jael, but Jael, as the Song of Deborah in Judges 5 announces, while Sisera is asleep, and you can go into why he's asleep. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not going to question things there because the Bible's not clear. But she takes a tent peg and drives it into his head and becomes the victorious killer of the king.
Yeah, and this is one of those passages that people you look for women leaders in the Bible, and this is the one of them that always gets lifted up. You wish you had some slightly better examples, but. So it's a good story.
This is the stuff of the Old Testament. And then we get into the stories of Elijah and Elisha. Elijah, the great prophet, and Elisha, his successor, who takes the mantle. And we have all these kind of bizarre scenes throughout the Kings, Second and First Kings, about Elisha. And we get the pottage, the unending source of food with the widow of Zarephath. We get him raising up her son. We get him in the cave, and he's kind of Ahab and Jezebel have scared him off, but God visits him, at first in all the violence, but then it's in the voice of reason, the thin, quiet voice.
Yeah.
Okay, and bringing things, and Elijah goes back. We have all the other clean water. We got the whirlwind, the prophets of Baal, the fire on the altar. He pours water on the altar, and then it ignites. So we got the meal in the jug of oil. We got restoring life. We got all these incredible little episodes that are occurring about this. Very Paul Bunyan-esque.
Absolutely.
Okay. And then we come to Elisha, who is successor to Elijah, who gets translated. We never hear of Elijah dying, and that's why in Passover Elijah is going to come, and a great song. I think it's a Three Dog Night.
Exactly.
And we get Elisha, and here again is, as Jason has said, get into the historical context, get into the words, get into the meaning. And so, what is Bethel at this time of Elisha? It's an idolatrous center of fertility cult worship. And fertility cult worship, how do you worship fertility cults? You have male and female prostitutes. And so you go and make donations, as the case may be. It is, from the very beginning, the whole concept of the bull at the bottom of Mount Sinai. Of the fertility imagery. And that's what they were fighting constantly against, a God of reason and word versus a God of, shall we say, organs and instinct. But in a culture where unless you grow crops and have lots of livestock, you're going to die. So we're wrapping up.
No, we're at 20 minutes. Bob doesn't have his stopwatch right now. I'm not telling you to wrap up. Bob likes to know where we're at.
I apologize, but I appreciate that because, So, but I would suggest an alternative and probably more accurate interpretation is these are not 42 children. By the way, 42 is also kind of fun because it's a Secret to Life universe and everything according to Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Yeah, of course there's going to be that many.
That's right,
Yeah.
that's right. And my daughter's soccer number for all the years, and she loved it because of that.
That's great.
So, but what we have is probably a gang of thugs. These are older adolescents. Imagine your gangbangers on the street. And you're an old guy who's showing up and going to try to clean house. So cleaning house means you're going to go into that fertility cult that the thugs and the gang really likes. And you're going to take it on. You versus the entire community of Bethel
Yeah.
that is represented by the thugs.
Yeah.
And so they're making fun of his old baldy, which is an insult because, yes, he was bald, but it's probably a whole lot more of an obscene kind of references.
Yeah.
So-
think of Samson and the cutting of the hair. And
With the Nazarite vows, because if you were a Nazarite, you would not cut your hair because you were pious, but if you got your hair cut, goes into the whole thing. Deborah or Delilah cuts it against his wishes, and so he loses his strength because his vow has been broken. And so my guess is that going into a situation where the gang doesn't want you to be there, like downtown, some places, and you're going to take them on. This is more like Die Hard with a Vengeance.
There you go.
Okay.
That's
And he takes on the gang. Now, and okay, yeah, how's it he's do it? God sends the she-bears out to help him. But he's standing up for God
yeah.
in opposition of those who don't want him to pronounce the will and the obedience to God that is required.
And that's the central point of the passage. Sometimes you look at the morals of the story and however we might interpret that, but that's not what the story is about. What is actually happening in the story? What is the story trying to tell us?
Right.
We need to listen to that.
Yeah, it's like using nature at all times. Jonah and the whale, the bears come out. Basically, Elisha is bracing down those who are corrupt. And he's going to take them on because that's what you have to do as a prophet.
Yeah. Well, thanks, everyone. Have a great week.